It's definitely Monday, isn't it? You can feel Monday. It's in the air. Sorry? School trip. Ah, I didn't notice. I'm on Shank's pony. Shank was so poor he didn't have a pony. I grew up in the country and I have a wealth of weird Australian things in my head. Pardon? Yeah, walking. Oh, hello, you're new. Well done. Well, actually, you're not new. I'm new to you as well. We're both new. Hi. I am not Shank. I'm Susan. Yeah, well, I'm to you, Sydney, guys. We'd like go back. We go way back. Oh.
6 months now.
Yeah, when was I in Sydney? That was a year ago.
Is it that long? Oh. The memory's so fresh, it doesn't seem like that long.
That's true. I have no. It was dreary weather, but I can't. What would that mean in Sydney? Anytime? No, not summer. So this week we're delighted to have Ruth as assistant. Jenny is ongoing continuity assistant, just to orient you to the staff. That's about it. Lisa floating in and out, that's right, yes. So Lisa's here for her own edification. Someone looked that up once when I used it. So actually I'm using it incorrectly. Maybe I am still. Are we all here? I'm just going to prattle till we're all here. Which is a very good reason for you to get here on time, isn't it?
Yes, what a reward.
Sorry?
What a reward.
What a reward for being here early, or a punishment for those being late. Inflict on you for being early. Okay, good weekend? Okay, lie on your back. Ruth, so you assisted this group. This group know you, don't they? Yeah. So while you're lying, I'll orient you to the week. It's basically a continuation of last week, the same kind of themes. We're continuing with this Amherst series. It comes from the first 2 weeks of their second year. So the bell hand may pop up in a reprise kind of fashion. And we'll continue to talk more about the concepts around muscle tonus and how important it is in Feldenkrais. So there's a bit of a thing in Feldenkrais that we work with the skeleton. And we do. We really, really do. And you can't work with the skeleton without working pretty directly on the muscles. So the skeleton is our kind of neutral way of working with the muscles. Rather than direct, a direct assault on the muscles, as it were, we move people more with the skeleton in mind so that the influence on the muscles is somehow more diffuse, more distributed, more, we really did say neurological. We're not working structurally on the muscles too much, like in a massage or a direct stretch or so forth. So we're working with the activity, the action of the muscles rather than the muscle structure. Not entirely. Sometimes we do work directly on the muscle, but it would be more the exception. So this is in keeping, right, with Feldenkrais's assertion that he's working with the person's nervous system. And the entree is via the body. Because that's what a great deal of the nervous system is given over to organising. So as you're lying there, you can become aware that there were influences over the weekend that had their way with you, let's say. So lying on the floor, does that help you to expose those influences? You can see, oh yes, I've got, my feet are a bit sore. I did a bit too much dancing on Saturday night, or my thumbs are sore because I found so many Pokemon characters. Now, you see, no one's responded because you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. You do. Sorry, Radio National this morning. Sorry? Fran Kelly. We love Fran Kelly. Adelaide girl. Not because we don't love her because she's an Adelaide girl. We love her because she's smart and articulate. Yeah, Pokemon, very clever. People have developed an app. So the generation, like my son's generation, who were little kids with Pokemon, and now they're in their 20s and they're, booting around collecting Pokemon from all over the city, Working around parks, collecting Pokemon. Yeah. It's amazing, these things. Well, it's tapped into their nostalgia. It's very clever. So we love this nostalgia thing, don't we? And why do we love this nostalgia thing? Because this is in our neurology. For that generation, they grew up with these Pokemon. They were their little childhood buddies. So it's like me and, the Secret Seven or the Famous Five or God Help Me Noddy. Millie, Molly, Mandy. I could go on. All English, no wonder. So now there's this beautiful kind of sense of recognition, right? And our nervous systems love this feeling of recognition. It's like they can breathe out. They go, oh, I know this. I know this series of networks. I know it. It's familiar. I love it. So, the feeling when you hear a song that you really like, you haven't heard for a while, or a refrain that you particularly like, and you get this kind of pleasure, that neurological pleasure, this recognition. It's a marvellous thing, this kind of, in a way, it's a pattern recognition. And our nervous system has two very good things it can do. It can recognise patterns, these associations that we talked about last week, and it can recognise novelty. You think, oh, those two things are opposite. Yep. So against a background of pattern recognition, a novelty thing pops up, something that's new. So I talk a lot about this in training. So if you've heard it before, really hear it again. What is pattern recognition in you now? What do you recognise in yourself as you lie down? And pattern recognition is not always, oh, that's delicious or that's pleasurable. It can be, oh God, not that again. Not that tweaky lower back, not this, not heavy legs, not whatever. Not always pleasurable. But what is the familiar? And then is there anything that's novel, anything that stands out? Oh, that's, okay. That's novel. I'm not used to feeling that. And to do a little bit more pattern recognition, roll up to sitting. Have your legs crossed in front, hands behind. And notice which leg you cross in front and try and pretend to be interested if you're not. So last week we had the left leg in front. This week we're going to have the right leg in front, just for this little test. No, we're going to defy Feldenkrais. I'm not going to be dictated to by this dead man. Have your left foot in front because I think it's more interesting. left foot in front, exactly the same as last week. Okay, good. Now very slowly, gently, start taking your right shoulder a little bit forward and your left shoulder a little bit back. And where do you initiate this? What are you aware of first? It might not be where you initiate, it might just be what grabs your attention the most. Are you breathing? And where does your head go? Where does it go today? And then remember what it did last Friday. And we did a few different kind of elucidations, let's say. So one was that relatively your eyes and nose stay oriented to the front. So your shoulder comes towards your chin. So for some people, their head got carried around to the left. So their eyes and nose started pointing more to the left. And for other people, their head started making a movement more to the right, so that their right ear came more towards their right shoulder. And there's 35 odd people in the room, and there are 35 odd ways of doing this. So however you're exploring, can you also broaden the functional significance of this, in that your eyes, your mouth, your nose, your ears are being carried, your vestibular system, so the inner ear little balance mechanisms. Can you also just hold very gently to this idea that as you're exploring the movement of your head, you're also exploring the orientation of these senses. So your world can somehow get a little bit bigger because your senses are getting free to move. And now grow the movement so that as your right shoulder comes forward and your left shoulder goes back, your right hip, the back of your right hip starts to lift off the floor. And the outside of your left knee starts going towards the floor. So the right shoulder is always going forwards and the left shoulder is always going back. So how does the weight shift from two buttocks to one buttock? Now keep going and quietly change over your knees, change over your legs. So that was last week, and now this is this week. I just wanted you to have a complete taste of last week. Now gently keep going with the movement. And notice this, it is different, but it may elude you how it's different. Keep that movement going. Now if your hands are getting tweaky, what can you do in terms of shifting your weight so that you're not committing so much weight and so much pressure on your wrists, but still getting this movement of the pelvis, that your weight is free to shift to the left. Now, if your right hip is going to lift up, is your left thigh free to move a little bit more vertical, a little bit more towards the vertical, I should say. That's it. And the left leg kind of just keeps hanging more. So in a way, the right leg gets a little bit more oriented upward. Now, you could even have the conceit, just think about it first. Don't do it. Just think about what would have to happen for your right foot to come up to standing. And the right foot has to be in front for this bit. You'll feel why. If it's behind, it will just get tangly. Where would the twist have to happen in order for the right leg to get carried, what would have to happen in the small of the back? Where would the head go? What would happen to the length of the spine in order for the right sole of the foot to somehow become oriented more towards the floor? Good, and leave it and rest. So he saw something. Now, because we're recapping an historic event, he saw something in the room that really intrigued him. So now he goes off on another play within the play, and he goes off for quite a few days. So we've got this exploration in mind, right? We've explored it twice now. And you can feel, right, that the, you know, it's a first cousin, if not a sibling, of the dead bird ATM. So we'll spend a while afterwards talking about why does he go off on this so-called, the seemingly tangential. So as you're lying very quietly and gently, so imperceptibly, start to lift both shoulders off the floor. Now, for some people, this immediately triggers kind of a big lift because you have this kind of wiring that you want to engage all your flexors. I'm just putting it out there that this is tiny, tiny, tiny. Maybe only you know. Do both shoulders lift off at exactly the same time? Does one lift off more? And remember to spread your attention so now you're not just feeling the slight decrease of pressure of the back of your shoulders on the floor, but watch out for any increased pressure anywhere else. So is the lift coming at the expense of a press somewhere else? In particular, we're interested in not pressing the head to the floor, right? So I'll be really explicit. Pay very kind, gentle attention to the back of your head so that the lifting of the shoulders, which obviously is going to involve the shoulder girdle, doesn't require the pressing of the head. Very gently start the bell hand movement with both hands. So that if you can just leave them lying on the floor if you want to. So it might mean that they just have to roll out a little bit to the side. If you're palm down, just find a way that it can be relatively unobtrusive, right? It's really background. It's background, background, background. The foreground is this gentle lifting of the shoulders. And could you add a detail to the lift so it's not just the two individual shoulders lifting, but imagine, so you've found C7, right? You know, at the base of the neck attaches T1, so it's that real transition point between neck and chest. Could you imagine that getting lighter on the floor as you lift? Could you be that specific? So that it's kind of the shoulders, but in a way the chest is tipping forward. And could you differentiate that? Maybe, you know, with some part lifting, then you, of course you will feel some part coming more in contact with the floor. But could you feel that it's not the contact that's pushing the shoulders up? Could you differentiate that? This is really, really detailed, right? This is not public lesson stuff that they'll freak out with this level of detail. So I'll say it again. The shoulders are lifting, and now you're getting a sense it's not just the shoulder girdle sliding on the chest wall, but the chest wall is actually tipping a little bit forward. So as if C7, T1 is going to come away from the floor a tiny bit. And without being too prescriptive about what you feel, for, you know, mechanically what will happen, of course, is more of the lower part of the chest will contact the floor, but it's not that initiates the movement. You're not pushing in order to lift. And again, paying particular attention to the back of the head, or maybe the forearms, or tensing the buttocks, or pushing the heels, or anywhere else. Broaden your attention so that you're not compromising the overall tonus of the system while you're gently taking your shoulders and C7 away from the floor. It might just be, you know, to slide a cigarette paper. That's a dear old-fashioned thing to say. I can't say sliding a vapor machine underneath, because that would be big, wouldn't it? And is the movement of your hands continuing, or has it arrested? And leave it and rest. Take a full rest. If you need to get off your back, that's fine. So how long, this is just something for you to contemplate while your system is resting. Now the bell hand movement is kind of entering your repertoire, as it were. So was it relatively easy to re-engage that background pattern of movement compared to when you first met the movement last Monday? So you've had a week. Some of you may have met the bell hand before. Was there some kind of familiarity to it? Some kind of association with it already, or not? So how we make associations and why are very individualistic. And trauma is one of the best ways to make an association, but to the point of it being pathological, almost impossible to, seemingly impossible to disassociate. So I tell my students at home that maybe if I traumatise them, they'd remember more about what I taught them. But it seems a bit extreme, doesn't it? If you're not on your back, roll on back onto your back with your legs long, arms by your side. And this time, very gently, slowly, tilt your pelvis so that the coccyx lifts up a little. The pubic bone goes a little bit more towards the ceiling. And it's a tiny movement again. So there's no sense of bracing or pushing. Just kind of, like it can just rock, like it's just a little, slightly unstable, and it would, if you just with a little bit of a somewhere, it would tip, in this case, backwards. So again, your attention usually will focus very locally. So think local, act global. The other way around, act local, think globally. sense what the rest of you is doing, is your pelvis tipping by virtue of your heels, which in each case is not what we're after. Is the pelvis tipping at the expense of breathing, which is also not what we're after. Begin the bell hand with both hands, gently, softly, sustainably. Elegantly. You could be feeling the lovely silky hair of a little baby. Or your favourite cat or your favourite dog. And the pelvis continues to kind of fold forward. So you can imagine a bit like your pelvis was folding forward, and now your shoulders are going to also fold forward. Like they were going to meet each other, but a tiny, tiny bit. It's like the beginning, the very beginning of them coming towards each other. And again, it's not happening at the expense of somewhere else having to push, like the back of your head or your elbows or your heels would be the main culprits. And do you synchronize the shoulders and the pelvis coming toward each other with the bell hand or with your breath, or what's the timing? Play around with the timing so that you're not wedded to one kind of entrainment, as it were. Now your legs just free to still dangle. So notice if there's any kind of tension in them, as if your legs want to come with the pelvis. They'd have to if the pelvis moved far enough, but this is such a tiny movement. Could the legs still continue to lie fairly heavy on the floor? Not with increased heaviness, right? They're not pushing. But could they feel somewhat divorced from the movement? Just like your arms. Are you able to become aware of something that's kind of activating gently down the front of you? It doesn't have to be so grabby that it interferes with your breathing or the movement of your diaphragm. It's very quiet kind of activity. If you're pushing with your head, push with your head more. Let's just get that one really clear. So keep going with the movement and now really push with your head. I give you permission to be naughty. Right. So that then you know for sure that you're not pushing with your head. And stop pushing with your head. So there's a few tricks. If people are pushing, we can either get them to do it more. So this is an aside, right? This is a meta comment for you as teachers. We can get them to roll their head so that they can't push. They can't rely on their head. So it's not everybody. I can't, you know, some people I can't even tell. You're so sneaky, could be pushing and I don't know. But really feel clear that yes, if the sole goal was to lift C7 off the floor, pushing with the head would be one mega good strategy, but it's not the intention of the movement, right? So leave the head, go back to lifting C7 in the back of the shoulders, and the pelvis tipping backwards so that the pubic bone comes towards the shoulders. And that the hands continue to make the flexion extension. It's kind of gentle pulsing, seaweedy, anemone. And leave it, rest. So again, a meta comment for you as teachers is these lessons that are quite small and that demand a lot of a lot of internalization can bring about a very profound feeling of silence within people, especially when the grapefruit fall off the table and start rolling across the floor. There you go. Don't ever say something profound because the fruit will interfere. So just be aware of, and I've ruined it for you, right, by talking about it. But remember these kinds of experiences, and it's really nice as a teacher to kind of bracket these when people can be very quiet and very silent within themselves. Which means as a teacher, you have to be quite quiet and silent within yourself. So if you're pacing up and down, this is not the time to pace up and down. This is not the time for you to be moving quickly. So you start to entrain, if you are moving around the room, you entrain your movements to be quiet. Your weight shift is subtle. Your breathing is quiet and deep. Right? So that might be something for you to think about this Wednesday, is how am I going to embody the state of learning that I want in this lesson? So maybe it's quite a lively lesson and you want people to be engaged at a more active level, in which case you moderate your own tempo accordingly. If it's a lesson like this, you want to drop people into this really deep experience, I really encourage you to play around with your own, how can you quickly drop yourself deep into your own experience, but still remain externally engaged as well. And if you're not on your back, if you can roll it back onto your back, if that's okay at this stage, because you've been on your back for a while. And again, resume this bell hand of both hands, bell hand movement, in a way that's sustainable and yet apparent to you. Very gently start to lift your shoulders, and this idea of lifting C7 a little away from the floor, and the pelvis rolling back and up towards your shoulder. So the coccyx lifts, the pubic bone comes towards your shoulders, as it were. For heaven's sakes, don't let your pubic bone touch your shoulders, because that would be weird. All right, now are you satisfied now that you're not pushing the back of your your back of your head with the floor to lever your shoulders off. Now be satisfied that you're not pushing with your heels to roll your pelvis back. So do it, push with your heels. See how that's an extraordinarily effective, quick way of rolling your pelvis back, right? But this is not the point of this lesson. So be very clear that that's that, and what we're after is something different, right? Where your legs can lie unimpressed by the movement. They simply happen to be attached to the underside of the pelvis. So any movement in them is incidental. So that the activity rolling the pelvis towards the shoulders and the shoulders towards the pelvis is confined to the middle of you. And without losing a rhythm, please modify the movement. So now it's just the right shoulder and the back of the left pelvis lifting. So it's like the front part of the right shoulder and the front part of the left pelvis want to come together. So now the left shoulder and the back of the right pelvis remain relatively unimpressed. If they move, it's only because of their counterpart. So I'll say it again, the back of the right shoulder is lifting off the floor. And the back of the left pelvis, so to the left of the coccyx. And how does that influence the way the weight shifts across the back of you? Do you go back to some former life of pushing the head or pushing the heel in order to get this? And again, the legs are unimpressed, they just simply lie. If there's any influence on them, it's just from the pelvis moving. It's not that they have a mind of their own, as it were. And now, gently, quietly, can you organise yourself so that the opposite happens? So the left shoulder lifts forward, so off the floor, and the pelvis tilts so that the back of the right hip lifts off the floor, so the back of the right pelvis. Small, gentle. If you need to start one at a time, that's perfectly fine. Because always the overriding thing is kind of quality. So the left shoulder and the right pelvis are coming towards each other in that intention. So clearly they're never going to get there. So there's no point in making it a big movement, right? And if it's a big movement, then you will have to use other parts of you. So you keep it small so that the area of attention, the activity, is just very quietly between that shoulder and the opposite pelvis. So the legs are disinterested, the arms are disinterested, the head is disinterested, and the hands are free to continue the bell movement. And of course, the breathing is like the tide. It will continue to rush in and rush out, irrespective of whether Malcolm Turnbull is the Prime Minister or not. I had to bring it up. I just read it in the paper this morning. I'm still on the media blockout. The paper was in the coffee shop. So why do I want to make you laugh? Because you're all getting a little bit serious. Or make you cry. Either way, it makes your diaphragm move up and down, right? Laughing or crying, your diaphragm has to let go. Good, leave it. Rest in a different position. Everybody rest in a different position. Please roll onto your back. And let's clarify even further detail with the asymmetrical lifting. Maybe just a few times lift both shoulders and tip the pelvis symmetrically. So like you're folding yourself forward. Tiny, tiny, just enough to be clear. When is enough enough? And feel how the weight is redistributed along the back of you. A few times. And now slide into the asymmetrical movements of the diagonal. So the right shoulder lifts and the left pelvis as if they're coming towards each other. So just check. This will have a different influence on the limbs because it's asymmetrical. So could you track as the right shoulder comes forward and the front of the left pelvis goes forward as if to meet each other, is there a slight difference in the rolling of the legs? Like tiny, tinies. Now, if your left leg rolls inwards, it's because it's going with your pelvis, so it's helping. So in a sense, actually, it should feel like the pelvis is rolling above it and it's staying outward. And then the pelvis is rolling over more in the direction, but away from the right leg. So this is very hard in language. You might even just need to think it through. But if you're a skeleton, and I just quietly picked up, put my hand under the back of your left pelvis and lifted it, not just to the right, but up towards the right shoulder, the legs would compensate, right? They're still on the floor, but the movement is proximal. And then similarly, if the right shoulder is lifting, the arms are still lying relatively heavy on the floor, so the movement proximal between the arms, right? Can you get a sense of that? So there actually isn't any movement in the limbs, but relative to them, the angle at the shoulder joint and the hip joint's changing, both shoulders and both hips. So we can look at this on each other as well. Can you get a little glimpse of what might be happening? And with the head, so that you're lifting the right shoulder, which in a way C7 on the right is lifting. So is there a little kind of influence on the head? Like, does it want to roll to the left, for example? It should, unless you're countering it. You can just be aware of what a skeleton would do. If I had long arms and I had one arm under the back of your right shoulder and one hand under the back of your right shoulder and one hand under the back of your left pelvis and brought them together, what would the skeleton do? And leave that and lift the left shoulder and the right pelvis as if they're coming towards each other. And go slowly and gently. And is this the same? So Feldenkrais is always very clear that none of us are symmetrical, like especially in the organisation of our flexors. So at this point in Amherst, he's stalking around telling everybody which is their easiest, which is their hardest. Can you tell for yourself? If you had to bring, so this is a relatively diagonal movement, right? Which couple likes it, which is kind of comes together easier, the left shoulder and the right pelvis, or the right shoulder and the left pelvis? How would you know? Would it be the breathing? Which one is the breathing? And you can alternate between the two. And maybe, the relationship isn't so black and white that one is easier and one is harder, that they just have different attributes, different qualities. Could you become a little bit more aware, a little bit more clear about what the attributes? So one is easier for you to breathe with, one is that you don't have to push so hard with you're not tempted to use the back of your head or your heels. You don't have to have a favourite, it's just noticing, right? What are the attributes? What are the differences? What are the similarities? And you can continue to alternate doing a couple with one diagonal, a couple with the other, and allow your head to roll left and right so that it's really out of the picture. And do you find yourself stopping and doing a little push with your head, just a little telltale thing? Can you catch yourself in a gentle way? And if you catch yourself doing one of these things, do you scold yourself and feel useless? Or do you just go, that's really interesting? That's really informative. That's where I slightly lose my overall sense of self. And leave that and go back to both shoulders and the pelvis twist and tilting upwards. And what's the symmetrical movement like now? With this greater and greater clarity on the parts, what happens to this whole movement? Can you track the changes in the front of you and the changes in the back of you as your weight shifts, so as your pelvis tilts in this backward movement and the shoulders come forward? How does your weight shift along the length of your spine? And the breathing remains unconcerned, unperturbed, undistracted, like the tide. Leave it, rest in whatever position you need to, but go gently so you're not disrupting your attention or jarring your system. And again, as my meta comment, notice this sense of silence. So sensing silence within yourself, this quietening of the nervous system. And again, it's not for everybody. Not everybody's nervous system is quietening. You can have all sorts of other things going on. But what does it mean to you as an experience to have a quiet nervous system that's aware but not rushing around, madly being aware? Would roll back onto your back. And now have your knees bent up so your feet are standing. And again, start this movement of lifting your shoulders forwards and tilting your pelvis back as if they're going to meet in the middle. And now this is a sneaky thing that he's put in, right? Because this makes it very easy, very enticing for your feet to push. So you can actually completely disengage the front, your flexors in the front of you that we're so keen on getting activated, and just push with your feet. So could you resist the temptation? So feel the temptation, know what the temptation is, and then allow it to go so that the feet are still there and still there on the floor, and you don't have to engage them. The legs can still be simply attached to the base of your pelvis and not interested in getting actively involved with tilting the pelvis backwards. Does that make sense? So imagine that I had my hands under your feet. And that I couldn't tell, if I shut my eyes, I wouldn't be able to feel when your pelvis was going, lifting or lowering, because your feet are disinterested. So this is like delayed gratification. One of my students does some exercises. She's a teacher, and she does these delayed gratification tests with children, where she puts the marshmallows or something on the table and they have to actively not take them, right? They have to make a decision. They have to inhibit it. This is intelligence, where you have an opportunity and you can choose not to take it because it's not what's necessary. You can delay. So this nonsense about not saying no to children, well, I'm sorry to say our nervous system has more no synapses than yes synapses. It's a more sophisticated activity. So how can we help you? Slowly keep tilting, bringing your pelvis and your shoulders to meet, and then letting them come back to the floor, and quietly slide your right foot down as you continue the movement of tilting your shoulders and your pelvis. So it can be really satisfied that your leg can give you, we can give your leg something else to do. and still the pelvis can tip forward and the shoulders can come to meet it. Now, obviously, there's a mechanical thing. It's going to make the movement a little bit more asymmetrical because the pelvis isn't as free to move. Just notice that and feel that you're interested in the skeletal reasons for the compromise, not the muscular reasons. So that now eventually the right leg will be long, the left leg will be still bent, and still the pelvis can continue on its merry way, tilting backwards, shoulders coming to meet it, coming back to the floor. And this quality, the quality parameter is that they're differentiated from each other, right? That they can do these two things. They can live in the same house, but they don't have to interfere with each other. I'm saying that because my son and his girlfriend arrived yesterday. I have to share my space, right? So can I share my space without us interfering with each other? That the influence that we have is not disruptive. Right? That we can do our two things. You know, they can do their Pokemon searches and I can do my whatever, Sudoku, without interfering with each other. This coexistence. Good. Then the next time you can bring the right heel back up again, so the right foot, and now slide the left foot down. And your attention is sustainable. The breathing is uninterrupted. And the pelvis and the shoulders can continue to meet and move away, and meet and move away. The head is free, the jaw is free, eyes are soft. And when the left leg is long and the right leg is still short, pause, just keep going there and feel the influence of this asymmetry. Yes, of course, the skeleton is asymmetrical, so the movement won't be symmetrical in the pelvis and the shoulders, but it's okay, right? There's still the clarity. And you're not pushing with the right foot, not pushing with the left heel. Bring your left leg back up slowly again. And a few more times, so both legs are now up, standing. And again, satisfy yourself that the pelvis can tilt without there being increased pressure under your feet. So that the weight shift is along the length of your spine. Now slowly, gently, just a few times, do the diagonal. So it's the right shoulder and the back of the left pelvis lift and come towards each other. And your sense, you know, the action is local, right? But you're thinking global. That doesn't change the pressure under your feet, doesn't change the pressure under your head, under your forearms. And what are the similarities and differences with your legs up for this diagonal movement, the weight shift across the back of you? Does the pelvis lift more than the shoulder? Could they be sort of equal? This is an equal relationship. You don't want the pelvis to be more keen on the relationship than the shoulder. And when you're satisfied with that, slowly swap so that it's your left shoulder lifting and the back of the right pelvis. They're coming to meet each other across the front. And again, the feet are disinterested. The breathing continues uninterrupted. The head is free to roll. And leave it and rest. Roll onto your back. This is the final exploration, so if you need to know that to eke out your attention, have your legs long. And a few times lift up the shoulders and tilt the pelvis back as if they're going to meet each other in this original position. Slowly bring your legs up to standing. Bring your feet up to standing so your knees are bent. And remind yourself that you can fold in the middle without pushing with your feet. That your pelvis is free to tip. And your shoulders can come forward to meet the pelvis a little tiny bit without the feet becoming the drivers. And now bring your hands behind your head with your fingers interlaced so that the back of your head is cradled in the palms of your interlaced hands. And allow your elbows to be gently open and whatever's comfortable, so you don't have to put a lot of effort into the arms can rest more towards the floor. They might not touch the floor, but so that you're not holding your elbows up towards the ceiling. So that your arms are free to rest. That's it. Allow your arms to your elbows to just drop. And now again, resume that movement of the shoulders coming forward and the pelvis tipping back to meet each other. And how is that different now with the arms in this configuration? So how do you slowly, gently have this beginning movement of a fold in front of you? And now your arms are kind of, they're not helping, right? Could your chest still feel free to roll forward with your arms in a way pulling it back? What has to happen in your neck? And is there a sense that you want to lift your elbows? So go ahead, allow your elbows to lift. Just a tiny bit to help your shoulders come forward off the floor. And having your hands behind your head, does it give you a little clue? Maybe some of you are still pushing with your head or have resumed pushing with your head. So your very sensitive fingers now are able to say, perhaps no, caught you. And the breathing is uninterrupted. And now slowly change to the diagonal. So lift your right shoulder and your left pelvis towards each other. And notice the asymmetry now in your arms. Resisting the temptation to push with your left foot. Does this accentuate the feeling for your head to want to roll to the left as you lift your right shoulder? So go ahead and lift your left elbow the right elbow with the right shoulder. So allow that tendency to occur. So the left pelvis is coming up and forward as if to meet the front of the right shoulder. The right shoulder's lifting and the right elbow. Could your head get lighter on the floor? Does the lifting of the elbow and the hand behind the head actually encourage the head to get lighter? So not only maybe has a tendency to roll a little bit to the left, but it could actually disengage even from the floor rather than pushing. Have a sensing that it's more levitating than doing a big crunch. This is not a crunch, right? Slowly, slowly. And so the lifting is, so I haven't actually said this, but could the lifting be as slow and the lowering be as slow as each other? So it's not a flop back, but there's this kind of gentle placing back. Could the return journey be as smooth and as uninterrupted as the forward journey? The journey away from the floor and the journey back towards the floor. Swap over the diagonal. So now it's your left shoulder and your right pelvis. Again, allow the left elbow to become interested. Slowly, slowly. But have it be very organic. So it's not like, okay, Susan said I can lift my head now, do a crunch. Could it just grow slowly, gently? So that you get the sense that with each iteration, the head becomes lighter. So there's a point where, yes, it can roll and it does just quietly disengage from the floor as opposed to lift. And then the return journey back to the floor is as smooth and as gentle as the forward journey away from the floor. And the feet are light on the floor, they're not pushing. They're not particularly interested. They haven't become completely detached, right? They're connected, but they're not engaged, other than to keep themselves standing. He says here, you don't put any insistence in the movement. It's really important. Is there a difference between the diagonals? And a few times do the symmetrical movement. Paying attention to the quality that the movement is just one of folding in front, that the shoulders lift. The pelvis rolls back as if it's going to meet the shoulders. The feet are soft on the floor. There's no insistence. It's this quiet, gentle folding. If the elbows want to lift off the floor, that's fine. But it's not to have a crunch happening, right? It's just they would be interested in being part of it and inviting the head to get lighter. The head doesn't have to lift. There's no imperative. Leave it, stretch out long on your back. Stay on your back, but stretched out long. Arms by your side. And spend a moment quietly, deeply checking in to your whole self in this position. As we started, this very familiar position, but noticing what's changed. If anything, how would you know? A few times for your own satisfaction. In this position, raise your shoulders and tip your pelvis back as if they're going to come together in the front of you. Very quietly, so the floor doesn't know. You're not levering off the floor. It's just this little quiet pulse within you that brings your pelvis and your shoulders together. You could add in the bell hand. And it's tiny, and you know, nobody else knows. And leave it. And with this same kind of quality of attention, slowly roll over to your side. Stay on your side for a moment. This is like a little transit stop, and then slowly, slowly roll up to sitting. Have a little transit stop so that all the time you can monitor that the quality of the breathing that you established with this lesson isn't compromised by now taking yourself up into standing. And stand. So there's still in this, your skeleton is still roughly the same configuration as it was on the floor, but now it's in standing, so this kind of postural tone is engaged. How's that similar and how's that different? this background tone that holds us together, as it were. And this tiny movement of bringing your pelvis and your shoulders together in the front in standing. And extrovert yourself enough that you don't crash into people as you walk a little bit. But maintaining this idea that you can track this sense of your whole self and the state of your tonus. So in research we talk about, are our findings going to be disruptive or are they going to be incremental? And you have to, and this is again a meta comment for you as teachers, but also as students of ATM. So some of your students will have disruptive findings. It will disrupt their self-image. And some it will be incremental. It will add to their self-knowledge. So find out for yourself, is it incremental and in what way? Is it disruptive, in what way? Come back to your mat. Quietly sit down in the tailor position with your right leg in front, and just once or twice, tailor, sitting cross-legged. Your medieval sewing position. So right leg's in front of the left leg. And start to bring your right shoulder forward, your left shoulder's free to go back, right? Because you haven't got the floor. And this idea that eventually the movement will become big enough that your left knee can go towards the floor, the right pelvis can lift. And go slowly, because this is movement. I'll give you the heads up. It's opposite to what we've just been doing, right? Where does your belly go? Where does your head go? Where does your sternum go? And if we added in that very quiet, softly held desire that your right foot might come to standing, how would that happen? Good. Yep, leave it. Enough. Long ATM. Again, not the length used for the general public, but deserving of a tea break. So quietly get up, start to orient yourself to others and to the bathroom and to the kettle and to your bits and bobs. And we'll have a 20-minute break, so 11:20.